Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the Chamber. We're going to carry on with the final three items we have today before moving into our second agenda. So we've now got item 11, where Hamish will be presenting on the infill lighting for our street program. So Hamish, it's all yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr Chair and councillors. This report is to outline where we've got to with the streetlight infill program. So this is the program to fill in the gaps following the LED upgrade. It's a 7-year program and we're in the second to last year. It's making fairly good progress and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Chair. Just a point of clarification, Hamish. The list on attachment 1, is that the finite list of all streets that are not compliant, or do we have some others which we have not yet identified?
So all the ones on the page, on page 171, were identified in the initial program. We'll probably look to do another round of assessment when we get a bit closer to the end, make sure there's no other ones that have been missed or need to go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Any other questions, councillors? Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Thanks, Hamish. Just in terms of reporting back, are there visualization tools that kind of turn that into a map instead of tables that would be readily available?
Through you, Mr Chair, certainly, yes, we could, the next report we could bring it in a map form if that would be easier to visualise for you. Yes.
Great, thank you. And just in terms of how many of our street lights are actually working at the moment, do we have any real-time indication of what proportion of lights are actually working in the city?
So through, Mr Chair, unfortunately we don't have real-time information on it, but we have recently had an independent audit done by Alf Downs, who's not working on the network currently. So they picked up around about 500 lights that are not working out of the 11,500 odd that we have within the city. We're working through the reasoning behind a lot of them. There's a combination of PowerCo faults, which is the supply side of things, and a lot of warranty claims. So unfortunately the LEDs that were put in place all those years ago haven't lasted the 10 years we're expecting, so the renewal program hasn't been able to keep up.
And can I ask specifically in the city centre, as out on Cuba Street, where we've just invested quite a lot of money recently, and it seemed like lights weren't working there. So is that some inclusive of the city centre, and why, particularly with a brand new street, do we still have street lights not working?
Yes, and unfortunately that was a power supply issue. So where we see a string of lights that are out altogether, it's generally a power supply. What we do is we take a generator out and test that we can make them turn on with the generator, right. And that sort of tells us whether it's a supply fault.
What do we do to ensure that PowerCo is timely in addressing faults?
We have officers who have access to their fault logging system, so we can have direct access in to see what their timeliness on it is. We spent an awful lot of time communicating with their staff.
And do we know how timely it is? Like, are they required within a certain number of days to fix things?
If they have KPIs, they haven't shared them with us. We take it upon ourselves just to check in with them very regularly, certainly where there's a decent amount out at once.
Right. Thanks for that info, Mr Chair.
Just a quick question that Councillor Barrett sparked. So when do we next receive a report on this? Is this an annual report, or will we get one every 6 months, quarterly? How often do we receive these?
I'd have to check with Hannah. I think it's...
Our officers are saying annual?
I think it's annually. That would make sense in terms of the work that we do. There's not a huge amount of change between now and Christmas. As you see, the first list of the dozen or so will be done by then, all going to plan, so there won't be much more to say.
So with that then, I agree with Councillor Barrett, a map would be quite helpful rather than trying to go on Google Maps and search 40 different streets. Is there any chance we'd be able to get one of those before next year, or would that be...
Absolutely.
Great, thank you very much. Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Hi, Hamish. Did I hear you correctly about the number of lights out around the city?
Correct. Well, I don't know, what did you...
Did you say 500?
I said 500, correct.
Wow. Last time I asked that question, it was 100. I've noticed quite a few light heads not on poles around the city. I hope we don't have a problem like Wellington. They're actually falling off, are they? They have been taken off and sent away to be fixed.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. That's all of the questions we have, so thank you very much. And I'll now look to move the recommendation. with the Deputy Mayor as my seconder. I'll open it, I should read it. That the committee received the report titled Update on Infill Lighting Required to Achieve Compliance in P&V Categories, presented on the 21st of June 2023. Does anybody wish to make a comment? Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My only comment was that we're into this program by several years with one to go. I was just, you either see this project through and it's a simple report, I guess, to receive, but I was just flagging that my comfort level of actually saying leave this to management has kind of been moving on track, and to avoid the need to report back to committee. But that's a personal view, and if others are open to it, I'm open to the recommendations around that, but just to flag it. Thanks.
Councillor Barrett.
Yeah, thanks. Although you might say the light's almost visible at the end of the tunnel, I think it's quite useful to continue to keep some visibility of it here in the chamber. In particular, what we heard from officers here was around doing an audit to actually follow all this investment, and I'll be very interested to see to what extent that's actually addressed the needs, because I know a number of streets that have had some improvements made still seem quite dim to me. It might just be my eyesight, who knows, but I'd be very interested in a further evaluative step, and it's good to hear that that's in train, and there's obviously also a relationship between how we manage vegetation and street trees and how effective the lighting is. So I think it's quite useful. It's something that we get a huge amount of community feedback on, and keen to keep it at a high visibility level. Thanks.
As there's no other speakers, I'll give a brief right of reply to a starting speech I didn't make. I perhaps don't have quite the fervent passion for streetlights everybody else or some others do in the room. I believe they're incredibly important, but I agree with Councillor Barrett. It's probably useful to have this as an accountability mechanism, just to check and make sure the work's being done, and to raise issues if any issues are occurring. Streets such as Councillor Barrett mentioned have been upgraded and may not be at the level we have all expected. So I appreciate Councillor Dennison's offer, but I think we'll move on to a vote. That has passed, 12 votes for and none against. We'll now move on to item 12 to our committee, which is our quarterly economic report, and I welcome Stacey Bell, our city economist, to present.
Kia ora tātou. Thank you for the opportunity to present to you this afternoon. I'd just like to make a few points on the report just before I get started, but then happy to take questions, etc. So I'd just like to draw your attention to page 178. There's actually an error on that page. The graph states Manawatu region, but it is actually the graph for Palmerston North City. So growth in the city was 2.8% over the year. Manawatu district for the year sat at 1.9%, and for the region, economic growth was 2.6%. So just want to clarify that. Also, under that graph, it says the growth of 20.5% over the last 5 years was to March 2022, but it's actually 2023. So just want to clarify those 2 points and apologise for those two errors. One other comment I'd like to make is the first page also states that our leading economic agencies no longer believe that we're going to go into recession, and of course data out last week proves that we are in what we call a technical recession, dipped our toe into one as such, at negative 0.1% growth over the March quarter. So I would think that might be a topic of some interest. It is fair to say that economic activity has still actually been relatively robust, and that may sound like an unusual thing to say, but one thing that is very different this time is our labour markets and high employment and earnings growth. So even though we have had negative growth in the last 2 quarters, it wouldn't feel like it for many because of those employment levels. But on the other side of the equation, there's still businesses and households out there that are doing it tough with the rising costs, both interest rates and the cost of living. So happy to take any questions through you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Stacey. Just picking up on your point around the recent news of recession. when you reflect on that and say that we are in a technical recession, the we there is the nation rather than the region or the city, is that?
The GDP data from Infometrics that we use at the TA and the regional level is not comparable with the GDP at the national level because they provide us with an annual average GDP growth, Infometrics. Actually, quarterly is not available through Infometrics. So I have spoken to them in the last week to see whether or not they can provide that series for us so that we can compare. But no, we can't say that we are or are not in recession. I would say economic activity here has been relatively strong considering. But, you know, whether we're in technical recession or not, we know that there's a whole lot of pressures out there in terms of the cost of living and very much in terms of the cyclical nature of the economy. We actually needed to get here to limit the increase in interest rate rises, etc. So now that we're here, we're going to move through the cycle, and because monetary policy is starting to work, ultimately we're not going to see that OCR peak at a higher level that will actually do more damage to economic activity over the longer term. So even though it's really tough for some throughout our communities, it's actually a process or a cycle that we needed to go through to see that inflationary pressures come down and equilibrium restored across the economy.
Thank you for that answer and context. Was interested to hear if I heard you correctly say that we don't actually kind of have the data to say whether or not the city as such is in or out. In your view, is that a concern? I mean, is that a concern?
I would prefer it if that data was available to us, just for context. However, Infometrics is the only source of GDP at the territorial authority level, so we don't have another source for that data. So hopefully they will be able to provide that information for us moving forward. They're certainly looking at how they can do that.
And is that a cost issue? Like, or is it just a data kind of processing
I
issue?
believe it's data processing, so they would need to make sure it's pretty robust.
Yeah, okay, great, thank you. Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Stacey. Just one question from me. We talk about the consents for new dwellings that have been issued in the city, which is naturally residential. Do we have any information on the consents for commercial operations and where we're sitting there?
Our non-residential consent data does cover that. So we have seen an uptick in consent activity there. So we had quite a large consent come in for signalled investment at Te Whatu Ora, Mid-Central. So that's flowed through to our consent numbers now, and we've seen a bit of a boost to the values.
So just to clarify, in the 443 consents for new dwellings issued to the year ended April 23, if I was building a new office space or something like that, that would be included in that figure?
No, not the new dwelling consents. There is reference, I'll just have a look at the page that it's on in terms of your report.
Thank you.
So we have new dwelling consents, rolling building consents.
On page 180, it gives
okay.
values, just not a figure of the number.
So page 180, and it says on the left-hand column, it says building consent activity picks up in 2023. And then it talks about the value of building consents lifting to 410.4 million over the year to April, up 10%. And then it talks about non-residential consent values increased by 28.2% to 189.4, and that was driven by the development at Te Whatu Ora of 35.7 million.
Great, thank you very much, appreciate that. Seeing no other questions from councillors, thank you, Stacey.
Thank you.
I'll seek to move this, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'd just like to open up by saying thank you to Stacey for the work that you do. Not to sound too frivolous, but this is probably the most compelling source of data for our city that organisations can use to make decisions on. And I often don't play the youth card in the chamber, but I was completing an assignment earlier this semester around a potential development proposal, and the data from our city economic updates was just exceptional. There was no other source out there that gives or pays the attention to Palmerston North that this does. Often we get wrapped up into the Manawatu Wanganui statistics, so it really is appreciated the work you do. Also attending the Chamber of Commerce economic update with Sharon Zoller and Stacey herself, you hold your ground very well. You definitely hold a candle to ANZ's chief economist. So just thank you for the work you do in representing our city and in providing us with good information that we can use to make decisions from. It's greatly appreciated. Any other councillors wishing to speak? Deputy Mayor? No? If not, in that case, we'll move to a vote. That is passed, 12 votes in favour and none against. We'll now move to item 13, which is being presented by Bryce Hosking, our Group Manager for Property and Resource Recovery, regarding Tamakuku Terrace 6-monthly update.
Mr. Chair, can I just acknowledge that Homes for People are included in this report, but I don't see it as a conflict of interest for my involvement to sit on this item.
Appreciate that acknowledgement. Thank you.
Yes, kia ora, councillors. Probably just a bit of an update, in particular to the sales numbers expressed in 3.4. In terms of section sales, so since the time of writing this, we've actually had 2 additional sales that have come in and then subsequently gone unconditional and settled, which is fantastic. And we've also just, hot off the press from last week, entered into a conditional arrangement with one of the group builders for another 5 sections, looking to work closely with the Ministry of Urban Development and trying to take advantage of a funding stream that they're currently pushing to be, I guess, underwriting and fast-forwarding some more housing being built and growth throughout New Zealand. So pretty exciting opportunity should it come to fruition, but I guess the key takeaway for that is that the sections and the market in itself seems to be improving slightly, and they are continuing to move and sell, which is positive, and probably not something I would have said 6 months ago. So that's an encouraging sort of turn of events. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Bryce. Just a couple of quick questions from me. So given we've now had 2 more settlements, the figure we've got here in table 3.10 is completed settlements at 30th of April 23, which was 4.95 million. So now we're sitting above, what, 5.5, somewhere around there?
Yes, roughly about that. Yeah,
okay.
They were both about 450,000, I think.
Great. And in terms of 3.11, it says here that given current growth projections, officers are still confident that sections will be sold. Given we're seeing very slow sales of sections across developments in Palmerston North and across sections in our region, the uptake is what you're talking about. What growth are you talking about? Is that how the median sale price has upticked slightly from 600 to 620, or what indicators have you got that gives you the confidence that these will sell?
It's probably, I'm referencing section turnover. So 6 months ago, in particular, the lending environment was very, very challenging. And as referenced in the report, we actually had to work with some purchasers who had even had pre-approval and then were unable to settle. One observation in talking to the group builders as well, which are a pretty good indication of how things are, they are noticing that's definitely freed up a bit, and there's a bit more lending in that respect going out, and that's encouraging, and I think that's coming through in the turnover of sections, which gives me some confidence. Up until now, we're also currently on all of the sections bar 1 achieved our listing price, which is also encouraging. So we're also not having to have any kind of drastic correction in the market, which is also encouraging. And it's pretty commonly supported by all parties getting involved, including some private purchasers that they feel we're priced on the market.
Great, thank you. Councillor Bowen.
I've popped in and out a few times there, Mr. Chair, thank you. It's that about listing price, Bryce, and I was reflecting on the comment in Stacey's report about the market maybe having bottomed out now. So you said there was one where we didn't achieve the listing price. Was that historical, or is that at the moment?
No, it was one of the recent 2 sales that just went past. To give context, it was about a $5,000 difference, so it wasn't anything significant.
though you're confident that we're listed to meet the market as
That's
where the market is now.
Definitely the feedback we're getting from the marketplace.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you, Bryce. That's all the questions we have today.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Right, Council, I'll look to move that the committee receive the memorandum titled Tamakuku Terrace 6-monthly update, presented on the 21st of June 2023. Look to the Mayor, Deputy Mayor as my seconder. I'll just speak very briefly to this. It's good to see that sections are beginning to sell and that we're seeing some slight uptick in the market. I do have some concern that we may still be sitting a little bit above the market, and that's the reason we haven't seen sections sell at the speed that we might have liked to. At the end of the day, the market feedback you receive is from people who do take an interest in the property, and the people who do take an interest in the properties are the ones who have the money to pay the asking price or nearabouts of what we do. We don't get the feedback from the people who don't talk to us. So I do have a slight caution there that although we're seeing a little bit of an uptick in the market, construction prices are still high. Floating interest rates, which is what often hinders building developments, are still very high and potentially rising. So I would hesitate to say we're out of the woods yet, but it is positive to see the work that our officers have done to get a few more deals across the line. So thank you. No other speakers. With that, we will move to a vote. Thank you, colleagues. That has passed 12 votes for and none against. We'll now move to item 14, which is our work schedule, and I'll see if there's a comment from our Chief Officer here.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Only comment I would make is I'm aware the sector profiles have been TBC for a couple of meetings now. So just to be clear, the intent is not to report back all those sector profiles at the next meeting, but bring back a report about the future way in which we do those. So Stacey has been particularly busy, but we'll look to get that to the August committee in terms of the next steps for those sector profiles. So there's been some good conversations happening with CEDA and other agencies about how we can work together on those. So.
Thank you. Any questions from councillors? No, in that case, I'd look to move the work schedule. Seconded. Was that a question, Councillor Naylor? Apologies. Councillor Naylor.
I was just going to check about number 7, which was down for today, the options for delivery. Will that come to the next meeting, or when is that? What's happened with that one? Options for delivery of the construction stage of Square East.
All right. The advice from officers, all that work was combined into the one report that we've had today, so that should be crossed off. Correct?
However, the report didn't cover options for delivery. It was just about the design work, wasn't it?
Just bear with me a moment.
I mean, the Chief Infrastructure Officer may want to comment, but I think certainly when we look at the resolutions that were passed today, obviously delivery will be the next step that the steering group needs to work through and report back to the committee. So, yeah.
So then a question from me, so it should remain on the work schedule, or it should be crossed off as coming back to us on the 5th of October?
Well, there was I mean, the terms of reference passed today had a 6-month report back to this Economic Growth Committee. So it's whether the committee's comfortable that the options for delivery are addressed as part of that report back from the steering group, or whether the committee would still like to see a specific report on the options. Clearly, delivery will be something that the steering group has to think about, I suspect.
I'm comfortable with the report back from the steering group unless any councillors would wish to otherwise.
Well, perhaps can I ask a further question then, because we received today some designs. Is that enough for it to be progressed to a contract to deliver that?
No, through the chair, the intention of that report today was to establish a steering group with elected members on it so that some guidance and things around communication and all of the things that you talked about in the debate today are actually dealt with properly, and then including having a much closer look at the design work and that as well. So there'd be further reports coming back, and look at that particular steering group will decide whether there's some interim steps that come back or prior to final design. So I'd suggest that certainly the what's on the work schedule there is will alter as it comes back to the report and as it comes back to this committee in the future.
Any further questions, councillor?
Sorry, I think that response probably just raises a few questions for me, because I thought the steering group couldn't make decisions. I thought that had to come back to council or the committee.
Yes, through the chair, it is clear that the steering group is not making the decisions here. The plans will come back through this committee.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, Mr Chair, just for clarification, the next steps was establish the project steering group and begin regular meetings which will work on the next steps, such as public consultation and project milestone timing. So that's what we talked about this morning.
Thank you. All right, no further comment from councillors. I'd seek to move our work schedule, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. We will vote. That is passed, 13 votes for and none against. Now, bear with me a second, I'll get the wording of our next recommendation to exclude the public. That the committee resolves that the public be excluded from the following part of this meeting listed in the table below, except for David Norman and Sarah Jenkin, GHD Consultants, and Jerry Sherman, Chief Executive of CEDA. I'll look to the Deputy Mayor as a seconder for that. Do we have any, can we question that? Do we have any questions? Seeing none, we'll look to vote. Right, that is passed, 12 votes for and none against. We'll just take a short break as we get the chamber reorganised.